Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome, everybody, to another wonderful day here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider, and perhaps today, while you're listening, you say, wow, oh golly, gee whiz, what a fantastic host. I want to hear more about Andrew Cooperrider. I want to hear more about what he has to say. Well, you can head over to theandrewshow.com, where I do The Andrew Show. That's what it's called. And you can go ahead and check out all the places to listen to that. But if you don't want to look real hard, well, you don't have to, because you can listen to it right here on 970, Sundays at 6 p.m., and on WBNA Wednesdays at 11. And also, if you're listening and you say, I have my own opinions I want to get across to Andrew Cooperrider about what he's talking about, go ahead and shoot me a text, 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Might get yours read out on air as I answer your questions. But today's show, we got a lot to cover, because we've got schools and cities lying to people about their tax rates, including right here in Jefferson County. We'll be going over that. Of course, the Senate race has been going on. Nate Morris, Andy Barr trading jabs on Twitter as they are racing for that Senate seat to replace McConnell. We'll dig into that and so much more. But to start us off with, there's something pretty big brewing with Ford. Now, of course, here in Louisville, we've seen the, I believe it's Ford Escape plant is being converted over to making an electric vehicle platform that they're going to make as a universal platform, according to what Ford said, and they're going to refit up that factory for that. And then also we see that the Kentucky battery plant going down in Glendale is opening up. They're starting production with just, I believe, 1,400 hourly workers, according to sources there. 1,400 hourly workers, far shy of their 5,000 jobs that Beshear's promised. But we'll see if that picks up, if that goes. But while this is going on, you have a decreasing demand for electric vehicles right now. Despite this, Ford has gone full steam ahead. They're losing billions a year on this, and now they're hitting another bump in the road at that battery plant, and that is a unionization campaign. The UAW is trying to unionize that plant. This, according to Kentucky Lantern, a 9-month campaign to unionize a massive electric vehicle battery plant in Hardin County will accumulate in a vote by more than 1,400 hourly workers this week. The United Auto Workers launched its campaign last November to unionize the Blue Oval SK Battery Manufacturing Complex, a joint venture between Ford Motor Company and South Korean-based company SK. The $5 billion complex in Glendale has been described by state officials as the single largest economic development investment in state history that would employ 5,000 people when a second planned plant becomes operational. The company began production at the plant last week. Now, real quick on that second planned plant, last I heard, Ford was planning on renting that out to Nissan because there's not enough demand for electric vehicles right now for them to justify opening up that second plant. That'll take some time to get to. So they may only open up that one plant. And you may say, well, how do they have the money to afford this? Before we dig into the unionization vote, this is important for people to understand. Ford has not really spent anything building these plants. Okay, so first we had the Biden administration. Well, not Biden himself, of course. He had no idea what was going on. But the Biden administration gave Ford billions of dollars, just over $5 billion from the federal government to build battery manufacturing plants in the South. And so some of the money used to build this plant is coming from there. The other place where they've gotten their money is from the state of Kentucky itself. The state of Kentucky has given Ford for this battery plant $250 million in forgivable loans. They gave them the land that the plant is being built on that they paid off. I believe it was about $20-30 million for them to pay off that land. They've also subsidized the training programs for the employees there using the Kentucky Community Technical College system to also pay for that. So all in, you're looking at with roads and the other work that we've done for the Ford battery plant, the state of Kentucky itself is upwards around $350 million. So they've got billions from the federal government, $350 million from Kentucky. At the end of the day, they're not out much of anything. That's why they continue with this electric vehicle push. But now this unionization vote is becoming a big, big problem. And here's why. You see, Tesla is the leader in electric vehicles. And Tesla isn't unionized. And what does that do to the manufacturing systems? Well, to give you an idea here, Tesla last year had a 12.13% net profit margin per vehicle manufactured, 12.13%. Meanwhile, Ford, on the other hand, was at just 2.36% on their combustion engine vehicles' profit margins. That's part of why Ford can't afford for these plants to unionize. It's a real problem for Ford. If they unionize, Ford will be unable to compete even more on the electric vehicle side of things because of Tesla. And therefore, Tesla can just wait them out. Tesla can afford to drop the prices on their vehicles another 10% and still make a profit. Ford can't afford to do that. And so they have to fight this unionization or else everything will be shut down. That's the future they have in front of them. Now, of course, this goes over a lot of individuals' heads. The UAW doesn't particularly care. Now, under Biden, of course, I'm not saying the UAW is all bad. I understand they're fighting for workers' rights and everything else. But on the same hand, there is a bigger picture here. And so you have the plant that they're fitting up in Louisville now for that universal electric vehicle platform. That is now in jeopardy. Now, keep in mind, that plant, when they put out their release on that, the batteries, they said, were not coming from Kentucky. They were coming from Michigan. Why is that? Why are the batteries, this is in 2 years out, they're already starting production on this battery plant here in Kentucky, producing batteries from that plant. Why are they not using batteries from that plant in the Kentucky? It's a much shorter distance to travel. Logistically speaking, the cost of trucking, logistics, supply chain is a lot lower when it's in the same state, literally, about an hour and a half away compared to up in Michigan. But you see, that is to do with, partially to do with the deals being cut. They have to provide so many jobs in places like Michigan, just like they have to provide so many jobs in places like Kentucky. And if they supply the right amount of jobs for the right amount of time, those loans that they've gotten, forgivable loans, become forgiven. And so they have to move around manufacturing from factory to factory to factory to factory to fulfill the jobs' needs. They're not creating jobs along the way. They're saying, okay, we'll hit our 5,000 mark here in Michigan. We started that plant sooner. That drops off sooner, so we have the jobs there, and then we're going to move these jobs then down to Kentucky to fulfill our requirements there in order to hit the loan forgivable status, in order to maximize the amount of money we don't have to pay back to the taxpayer. That's the game being played here. But this all falls apart if they continue to not make money. And how many jobs will be lost? I mean, the plant that they're fitting up in Louisville, if they continue to not make money off electric vehicles, that goes away. Those are union jobs. And their only way to be able to increase their profit margin comes from the battery manufacturing side of things. And here they are struggling. And of course, the law says they can't come out per se and say a lot of these things. They've tried. They created their own website where they talk about the pros and cons, more the cons, obviously, of unionizing compared to unionizing. And it's hard. Look, from a worker standpoint, there are concerns. I mean, people there have been complaining about some issues regarding bats, mold. One of the people interviewed in the Kentucky Lantern article was talking about how there's a fire alarm going off, but because of a leaking hose near him, he couldn't hear it, and it took somebody else walking by to tell him there was a fire alarm going off. He's worried about it. There was this issue regarding mold coming in from the equipment they're bringing in from overseas. The crates are coming in, and they have a mold in it that is of some health concerns. Bats apparently have been a big issue. I mean, can you imagine? You're sitting there working on building a factory, and you're fending off bats. You have to worry about bats attacking you. Is this Transylvania or is this Kentucky? Okay, we're sitting here trying to make electric vehicles while we're doing war with bats. Yes, I understand why they'd want to unionize. I would too if I was fighting bats. Okay? If I was having to fend off blood-sucking flying creatures while I'm trying to build a factory, yeah, I would want a union too. I don't blame them. But Ford will not be able to compete in the electric vehicle realm, and they will continue to lose money if they unionize all parts of the electric vehicle production. And Bashir knows this. That's why he stayed out of this unionized conversation. He stayed away from it. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about how local school districts and cities are lying to you about how much they're raising your taxes so you don't put forward a referendum to fight back against these huge tax increases, and we'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. We'll see you back here in a few short minutes.
Are you ready to stand for truth? Kentucky is at a crossroads, and we need voices that won't back down. This is your moment to rise, speak up, and be part of a movement that's changing the narrative in the Commonwealth. Kentucky's Voice is calling on bold citizen journalists, fearless editors, and those unafraid to speak truth in the public square. Volunteer, intern, contribute. Scan the QR code or visit kyvoice.org to join the fight. This is more than media. This is your moment. You are Kentucky's voice.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on Kentucky's Voice. I have a public service announcement for you all, but before I dig down into it, if you want to comment, dig into the conversation, become a part of it, you can go ahead and text the show here at 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. Compliments are appreciated, accepted, will be read out. Negative remarks, will be pushed to the bottom of the list. I won't even read them. I have a screener. It hurts my feelings. Anyways, so digging into it here, Wave News. Here's a little headline for you. JCPS approves lower property tax rate. That's a lie. They raised your taxes 4% with the new rate. Powell County says they're only raising your taxes a simple nickel tax, 5 cents for Powell County residents. That's a lie. They're raising your taxes a massive 16%. Jessamine County Schools says, hey, look, we're just maintaining the rate the same or just a marginal increase. That's a lie. They're raising your taxes 10%. Bowling Green, the city of Bowling Green says, look, we're just keeping our rates the same. We're not raising your taxes at all. That is a lie. They're raising your taxes 6%. And they don't want you to know that. Why don't they want you to know that? Because in the state of Kentucky, according to KRS 132.017, in the state of Kentucky, if any taxing district raises your taxes year over year more than 4%, you have a remedy to make it to put it on the ballot for a referendum for approval. So every year, these taxing districts are able to increase your taxes 4%. From year to year, 4%. If they raise it more than that, there's a process detailed in KRS 132.017, but essentially you have to go out and like I said, there's more of a process here. You have to get the correct paperwork, but you go out and either get 5,000 signatures from registered voters or 10% of the amount of voters that voted in your last presidential election, whichever one of the two is lower. You go out and you get that, and if you get those signatures and they're verified, that tax increase will now be put on the ballot for people to approve or disapprove. And these taxing districts, they don't want you to do that. They can't afford, they don't want to fight this because they can't. Well, you'd hope nobody in their right mind would approve school districts and cities raising taxes by 10% in 1 year. Nobody would approve that. If that was laid out before you as a question, unless you're like into being financially dominated by the state because you're a weirdo, just a weirdo that thinks who's sitting at home right now thinking, you know what? I don't think the government has enough money. I don't think they're taking enough of my paycheck. I have too much to spare. Let's write more money. Let's give and if you're thinking that, look, you don't need to raise everybody else's taxes because you feel that way. You can just go on to like the Department of Treasury's website. They actually have a portal for you to Venmo them money to pay down the debt. If you want to Venmo them money, if you feel guilty, you're like, I have too much money, I want to give it to the government because I think they're good stewards of it. Well, you can just go ahead and do that. You don't need to wrap the rest of us into it. So in actuality, nobody's going to sit there and vote yes on voting for a 10% tax increase. Or they shouldn't unless they're just idiots, complete and utter idiots. And so therefore, these taxing districts, like cities, like school districts, they have to play these games. And they don't want you to pay attention because these tax increases all deal with property tax increases. And maybe you've heard it. Maybe you heard Jefferson County Public Schools say, hey, look, we're lowering your tax rate. They're not. The check you write will be 4% more. The next time you have to pay your taxes, your property taxes, it will be 4% higher than the check you wrote this year. It'll be 4% higher. Okay? And how do they get away with hiding this? How do they get away with pretending like they're decreasing your taxes when they're raising it? Well, it has to do with the way taxes are talked about, property taxes in Kentucky, okay? It gets a little mathical. We're going to go into a little maths here. Not too much, though, so stay with me, okay, because I'm going to simplify it down. But essentially speaking, we all know property values go up year after year after year. And your property value sometimes can go up as much as 10, 15, 20% over the course of 5 years, 10 years. And so obviously, if the taxing rates stayed the same throughout, the increased check you'd be writing would go up precipitously every year, despite there not being a tax increase. So in Kentucky, the way they look at it is they say, how much is the check you're writing to this taxing district? What is that amount of money? If you wrote a check for $1,000 for your property tax to the school, they can only increase it by 4% year over year, regardless of what your property value does, unless they raise it. And if they try to raise it past that 4%, it now can become a referendum. And so when you're looking at the taxing notice, you're going to see something called compensating tax rate. That's what you need to pay attention to. That is the rate with the higher property values that if they charged you the compensating tax rate on these notices, for an example, going back to Powell County, their current taxing rate is 52.3 cents. Now, for those of you who don't, or 52.3, for those of you who don't understand what that means, for every $100 of property value, they charge 52.3 cents. Okay? That's their current rate. But the compensating rate is 50.3 cents. What that means is for you to write the same dollar figure check to the school for your property tax next year, you would be writing a check at the same amount. So if you wrote $1,000 to write $1,000 next year, they need to lower the taxing rate from 52.3 to 50.3 because of property value increases. So what is Powell County Schools trying to do? Well, they're trying to raise their rate to 58.3. Now they want to argue, look, it's just a nickel tax. We're raising it like 5 cents. It's no big deal. No, they're raising it 8.3 cents, which may not sound like a lot, but when you look at the figure, because percentage-wise, that is a 16% increase in tax rate. So if you wrote a check for $1,000, next year you're writing a check for $1,160 because it's a 16% increase. And they're hiding this from you because what can you do? Well, you can get a referendum on this. So they're going to downplay it as much as they can. You have places like Bowling Green out there right now telling people, look, we're keeping your rate the same. This is false. They're raising your rate 6%. If you're somehow listening to this and you live in Bowling Green, that tax increase is you are able, if you go out and either get 5,000 signatures or 10% of the amount of people that voted in the last presidential election, you can get that tax rate on the ballot. Jefferson County listeners, listen up. The school district isn't lowering your taxes. Don't believe the headlines. They're raising your taxes 4%, the most amount they can, without having to face a referendum vote. Jessamine County Schools, if you're in the central Kentucky area, don't even get me started on Fayette County Public Schools now, trying to raise the occupational tax 50%, trying to raise, now they're talking about also raising property taxes because both, they want to be fighting both at the same time because they're hoping one might go through. But anyways, Jefferson County or Jessamine County, if you're listening to this, their tax rate for the schools there is going up 10.22%. You can recall that. And unless you want to be paying 10% more on your taxes, you need to do so. And don't feel bad for them either. That 4% increase, over 18 years, they will have doubled the amount they're taxing you if they increase 4% every year. In 28 years, it will have tripled. According to the Inflation Bureau of Labor Statistics calculator, if we rewind 23 years ago and we put in, or 28 years ago, and we put in $100, that's worth $203 today, but your tax rate would be $300 on that same $100. They're not doing bad with this 4% limit. They're able to surpass inflation. You need to be fighting these tax increases. Don't fall for their lies. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice. We'll be back here in a few short minutes. I'm Andrew Cooper.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you are back here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooper-Ryder. And if you want to reach out to the show, join into the conversation, you can text 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. We got a text here. Starts off by saying, I really like the show when you're doing it, Andrew. Well, that's the way to my heart right there. Thank you so much. Anyways, this is very interesting about taxes. I'm trying to keep up, but I thought it might be noted that at least in Jefferson County where I live, they only make adjustments to your property values every 4 years. That's how often they reassess. Once again, if you want to text into the show, that's 502-571-0970. 502-571-0970. So that's correct. They're not always going to always reassess your property values every single year. And really, these fights come into play right around that time where you've seen a nice, huge increase in property values. The other thing to note as well, on that compensating tax rate that I was talking about, that doesn't account for newly built properties as well. So when you look at that compensating tax rate, they could still be making more money than that amount, because when new properties are built, they're assessed, they pay a property tax on the new values. And so when they're purchased or bought or sold, you'll also see increases of values being registered as well. So that is something to be aware of. But digging into what our governments, though, are doing with all this money, I thought this would be interesting, kind of coming off a conversation about them lying to you about how much they're taxing you. I thought we might talk about what they're spending the money on in the first place. And this brings about a few weeks ago on my I don't know if it's on Kentucky's Voice or on my own show, the Andrew Cooper-Ryder Show, which of course you can tune into you can go over to theandrewshow.com, see all the different places you can listen to that, but you can also listen to it right here on 970 Sundays at 6 p.m. and you can watch it on the old TV there on WBNA Wednesdays at 11 p.m. But I was talking about how the Kentucky legislature approved a contract that came through the Contract Review Committee. So the way this works, they're triggered by the executive branch, part of the government, of course, the governor's administration, the governor's branches. They trigger a spending on a contract that goes to now a statutory committee called the Government Contract Review Committee. And what they do there is they can have hearings on, ask questions about these contracts. They can vote to approve them, disapprove them, or do nothing. If they do nothing or approve them, they go into effect. If they disapprove them, it goes over to right now. Now, this isn't court to change this, where they tried to move it over to the state treasurer to overcome the committee's veto, but it will go over to the finance cabinets for their approval or veto. Most of the time, of course, they approve it. It's coming from the Beshear administration. And now the Government Contract Review Committee can't do anything unless they get back into session. And then they could, if they got back into session, take some actions in order to punish those for putting forward these contracts. So the legislature will say, look, we can't do much. One, you can at least not approve these contracts. But two, you could take steps once in legislature, once in session, to make it clear that if you're going to put forward contracts we disagree with, well, you will be held accountable for that. But one of these contracts I talked about was where they gave $1 million to the Bourbon County, Paris, Kentucky, Bourbon County Chamber of Commerce to pay for distilling equipment, $1 million to pay for distilling equipment that then they could lease back out to a private for-profit distilling company called Divine Spirits. So they would move their or to finance for them that equipment so they could operate in Bourbon County. And while I like bourbon as much as the next guy, well, maybe not as much as the next guy, depends on how much you're into it, but I'll have a good bourbon every now and then. I'm not against it at all. I like a little bit better the Kentucky moonshine. I have a little bit of that apple pie moonshine. I'm pretty sure is made in some dude's bathtub that I drink on occasionally, but I'll drink bourbon too. I like it. So I like as much as the next guy. I'm not trying to denigrate that at all. But however, The government has no business spending $1 million buying distilling equipment for a private company, but that is what our state did. That Kentucky Contract Review Committee approved it. It was put forward by the governor. Everybody's hands dirty here. And I bring that up because at the time where I first talked about that story, is about a month or so ago, I was talking about what a bad investment it was. We were seeing all these bourbon companies filing bankruptcies, not going through. We were seeing Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, their stock was dropping off. That matters. They're headquartered here out of Louisville, the parent company of that. That's why it's worth talking about when it comes to the Kentucky bourbon industry. And I was talking about how bad of an investment it is. Well, it gets even worse now, as we now have, since I first talked about that, 2 more bourbon distilling companies. The most recent one coming out of Georgetown, Scott County, Limestone Farms Distilling. That one's tied to Tim Couch, of course, but they now have millions of dollars of liens filed against their property as well, struggling financially. We've seen 4 other of these distillery companies struggling financially. The market's oversaturated. Despite that, though, the government saw fit, your state government saw fit to take $1 million of your money and invest it into a distilling startup. How fantastic. But that's not the only thing they waste money in. No. I want to talk about taxpayer-funded lobbying. Now, some of you at home may be scratching your heads like, whoa. What is taxpayer-funded lobbying? Well, apparently, our system has become so corrupt. Now, you thought we elected representatives, and then those representatives would go ahead and represent the wishes of both their constituents and also, of course, represent the needs and wants of the municipalities, counties, governments that are lower than the state government. To mean they actually have less power, but more so lower than the state government, to represent what they need from the state as well. That's how the representative system is supposed to work. But instead, it's become so corrupted that if you want your representatives to represent what's going on in their districts and areas and then themselves, quote unquote, lobby, when a legislator does it, you'd call it whipping votes. So instead of them whipping votes for a bill or for a provision or an amendment that benefits their area, what they're supposed to do, instead you now have to pay a lobbyist to talk to the legislators that have been elected to represent your area. And who's paying for these lobbyists, and how messed up is this? Well, it's so messed up that the state legislature, remember this Contract Review Committee, they're approving the contracts to lobby themselves. I'm not kidding. This just happened this past month. They approved spending $44,000 for the Kentucky Community and Technical College System to hire a lobbyist. And according to the contract, that lobbyist is supposed to lobby the legislature. So the legislature approved a $44,000 contract to lobby themselves. This is clearly a broken system. But it's not only happening at the state level. When we look locally, and I was talking about the local representatives needing to represent the needs and lobby for the needs and concerns of not just their citizens, but also the localities, municipalities they're overseeing. Well, we see local places having to shell out money right here in Louisville. For an example, Louisville and Jefferson County Metro government paid $19,200 just last year for lobbyists to lobby the state government, to lobby the state legislature, specifically state legislature. Louisville and Jefferson County Metropolitan Sewer, $30,100. U of L. That's you may not think of that as taxpayer funded, but look, that is a government entity that receives hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. $19,200 to lobby the Kentucky legislature. JCPS, Jefferson County Public Schools, spent $30,000 on a lobbyist last year. $30,000 to lobby our state government. just here in Louisville. That is $100,000 just over those few. And literally, I'm going to be honest, I looked for like 4 minutes. I searched for 4 minutes and found these people in the list of expenditures lobbying disclosures for last year. That's it. And just in that quick 1 year, in those quick few minutes, we found $100,000 of your tax dollars paying for lobbyists to lobby the people you elect to represent you and to represent those people. We shouldn't have to pay a lobbyist to communicate, to express our concerns and needs to the legislators that are elected to represent us. But that's how the system is working, this taxpayer-funded lobbying system. And there can be steps to deal with this. Obviously, this is an uphill battle. Obviously, this is a fight. Because the lobbyists have a very vested interest in making sure you do not fight, that this bill isn't passed. Every year for the last, I think, 4 years, Representative Rayborn out of the Owen County area, Northern Kentucky area, has proposed a bill to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, to end this once and for all, to say, look, you can't spend taxpayer dollars lobbying. And this money, by the way, it doesn't even account for the associations. So all these groups, like your school board, like your county clerks, like any of these offices, they all join these associations. The Kentucky County Clerks Association, the Kentucky School Board Association, the Kentucky whatever association. And they use your taxpayer funds to pay for the fees to join those groups. And those groups primarily lobby the government on behalf of them. So there's another way. They're kind of laundering the taxpayer funds through these associations to pay for the lobbyists. That's another way. It's disgusting. And if our legislators actually wanted to do something about it, they would be passing Felicia Rayborn's bill this next session. Well, coming up after this, we'll be digging into a little bit more about the Senate race going on here in Kentucky. If you want to join into the conversation here, feel free to text 502-571-0970. 502-571-0970. We'll see you back here in a few short minutes.
Kentucky's Voice is your home for real news, real people, and real answers. But we can't do it without you. Your financial support helps us bring truth to the forefront, hold leaders accountable, and give a voice to the people of the Commonwealth. Join the fight today. Give online at kyvoice.org or text KYVoice to 53555. Every gift makes a difference. Stand with us. Speak up. Stay strong. You are Kentucky's voice.
Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back here on Kentucky's Voice, host for the day, Andrew Cooper Ryder. If you want to join into the conversation, you can text us over here at 502-571-0970. I've gotten in a few texts here real quick from prior segments, so if you weren't listening to those segments, shame on you. What are you doing not listening to me? Andrew Cooper Ryder's on. Rush over to the dial. Tune in. Anyways, so here we got a text in saying Jessamine County is saying they aren't increasing the tax, and the vote is the 28th. Here is what the this is just perfect example of what I talked about my second segment about these school boards and school districts raising your taxes and then lying to you about it. It's like it's raining and they're trying to tell you it isn't wet, right? So Steve Scrivener, the chair of the Jessamine County School Board, this is what he said. He said, one of our local politicians has posted that the school board is seeking input on a potential tax rate increase. To be very clear, the school board has no plans to be raising the tax rate. For those interested, we are obligated by law to meet once a year in late summer to set the school tax rate for the upcoming year. I've served on the school board since 2019, and we haven't raised the tax rate once during that time. Now, if you're listening to that second segment, you might be like, well, Andrew, you mentioned something about the compensating tax rate. Well, let me tell you what the notice of hearing for the Jessamine County School Board has to say. So this is from their notice. So this is from the school district putting it out, where they're detailing how much they're actually raising people's taxes. And so they said the general fund tax levied in fiscal year 2025 was 67.8 cents on real property and produced a revenue of $40.8 million, basically. The proposed general fund tax rate of 67.8 cents on real property, of this amount is $3.9 million from real and personal property. Now we get into it. The compensating tax rate for fiscal year 2026 is 64.5 cents. So they're saying, well, look, we're not raising your rates. No, they are, because if your tax bill was the same as last year, they would have to lower their rate from 67.8 to 64.5. But they're not. Instead, they're increasing it, 3.3 cents? 3.3 cents. That's about a 5-6% increase of taxing. Actually, real quick, let me see if that's, and this was just brought up by a texter. So if I seem like I'm not super prepared, well, somebody texted this in. I'm acting on the moment. So cut me a break here. So divided by 64.5. 64.5. Nobody wants to see me do math. Pull it together, Andrew. Pull it together, Andrew. And that would be an increase of right at 5.1%. Jessamine County, that's recallable. You can file for a referendum for that to be put on the ballot. And they're trying to pretend they've never raised your taxes. If the check you're writing next year is more money than the check you were writing last year, they've raised your taxes. Any normal person would say that, but apparently not here. Got another text here. I haven't screened it. Hopefully it says something nice. You opened my eyes about taxpayer-funded lobbying. I had no idea. What a racket. This really fires me up to become an activist in some way. Well, absolutely. It is a good reason to get fired up. And if you're looking for a way to get active on these issues we're talking about, obviously reaching out to your legislators is a big part of it. But the way you go out and make sure that people are listening to you when you are talking about these local issues, and the way you make sure that they respond to you is by making sure you can make a difference in these elections by you got to be willing to get involved electorally. Activism is only as effective as you are able to change the outcome of an election. Now, you may be thinking, well, I can't change the outcome of an election. You're wrong, okay? Follow me here. The average state house rep gets elected by about 2,000 to 3,000 votes in a primary. That's only 1,600 votes if vote no, if 1,600 people vote no in a district of 45,000 people, vote to not reelect that person, somebody else wins. Now, 1,600 might sound like a lot, but you and a couple of friends going out hitting doors, making phone calls, organizing, talking to your friends, your neighbors, that 1,600 number is very, very attainable. And also, if you have a municipality out there taxing you more, raising your taxes more than that 4%, please go read KRS 132.1.017. That's KRS.017. Look at the process for getting a referendum on the ballot and get it done in your area. It's incredibly, incredibly important. Now, going into, though, real quick, want to talk about the Senate race going on here in Kentucky. There's been a little bit of a tat-a-tat on Twitter. Of course, this is actually a very ugly election just in general. Like, ugly, it's not ugly in like a car accident way, because you're kind of like, oh man, I don't want to look, but I can't look away kind of situation. This is more like ugly, like you signed up to go to a fight and it's turning into an ugly fight. So it's kind of what you paid for in a way. It's kind of what you want to see, but it's still like, ooh. And that's what this is turning into. I don't know if I've seen candidates more at each other's throats this early on Twitter and social media in a race like ever before. Normally, they're doing something that the kids call subtweeting, where you're talking about somebody, but you don't say their name. So you're really not talking about them, but you are talking about them, and everybody knows you're talking about them. That's called subtweeting. That's what the kids call it. But anyways, normally you'll see some of that. You won't see direct call-outs by name, but we're seeing it everywhere. I mean, Nate Morris is calling them out every time he's on TV. Andy Barr, he was on Fox the other day, started calling out Nate Morris for it. They were cutting him off while he was doing it. It's kind of funny to watch. But he was calling out Nate Morris on it. And so it's kind of weird seeing this anger, this back and forth, this rawr. I don't know what noise best represents this. I wish I had a soundboard. Anyways, but going into it here, Breitbart put out an article. Nate Morris tweets it out, talking about it here. But they put out an article talking about Barr changing his tune on tariffs. So back in 2018, during the midterms, during Trump's first term in office there, and Trump has always liked tariffs, of course, but during 2018, Barr was debating with a Democrat opponent. He said, he said that he is standing up to the president on these tariffs. So at that time, he was saying he's standing up to President Trump on the tariffs. It was 2018. And they said, I absolutely am. I am a co-sponsor on a bill that the administration opposes, the Global Trade Accountability Act. Now, this is a bill that is somewhat similar to what Rand Paul has actually supported and talked about in recent times, that then people attack Rand Paul over the same, Andy Barr would attack Rand Paul over that now. And what it does is it deals with taking away the president's ability to unilaterally raise tariffs on countries and to create trade barriers with the U.S. without congressional approval. And Andy Barr was a supporter of that bill. But now he says, look, and so Nate Morris puts that out there, and he quote tweets that article, and he says, I stand with President Trump on his tariff agenda and disagree with the globalists like Andy Barr and his mentor, Mitch McConnell, who have a long history of opposing tariffs who must protect the jobs and wages of American workers. He then goes on to tariffs and everything else. And then Andy Barr responds. He quote tweets Nate Morris's tweet about the article, calling out Andy Barr for being against Trump in 2018, but changing his tune now that he's running for Senate. And this is what he says. He says, Nate, you're full of it. I proudly voted for Trump's trade deals in the first term and supported him 100% right now on tariffs. And support him 100% right now on tariffs. Okay, so come on. He's admitting to what Nate and Breitbart are calling him out for. They said, well, you didn't support Trump in 2018 on tariffs. And he's like, this is the same thing we were talking. I guess the theme today is people who lie in government while simultaneously backing up what you have to say. And this is here. So he says, Nate, you're full of it. Says that Nate's lying when he talks about Andy Barr being against tariffs during 2018, but has only changed his tune now that he's running. And then he backs it up by saying specifically, I probably voted for Trump's trade deals in the first term and supported him 100% right now on tariffs. Supported him 100% right now, keyword, right now on tariffs. Now, do I have any issue with a politician learning new information and then changing their mind? No. In fact, I think we should have more of that in our politics. I wish we had a more graceful and forgiving political system where when somebody comes out and can clearly articulate why they changed their mind, what they were doing in order to be different, in order to change their minds and beliefs when it comes to things like this tariff issue. And he says, look, I learned new information, therefore I'm now for tariffs. That'd be great. But the problem is our politicians aren't doing that. They're not coming out and explaining why they changed their mind. And I get it. There's no incentive for them to do so. Your incentive is to pretend and gaslight. Your incentive is to say, look, I've always been this way. I swear, believe me. Believe your own. Don't trust your lying ears. Don't trust your lying eyes. Believe me, I've always felt this way. When in actuality, they haven't, and they admit to not. He admits to it right there. Now, when it comes to the tariff issue, this is kind of interesting. The fight over, do you approve of tariffs, do you not approve of tariffs? That's what really points to this primary being about the audience of one Trump. Right, wrong, or indifferent, both Andy Barr and Nate Morris are messaging to get Trump's endorsement. That's who they're messaging to. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to really go head-to-head on the tariff issue. I mean, it's not really a question people are asking, right? I've never walked around outside, talked to people about politics, and a lot of people talk to me about politics and text me and call me, and of course, I talk about politics all day long. And I've never had anybody ask me amongst all their questions, like, do you really support these tariffs, or are you really against it? So if anything, on one side you have apathy, but then the polling on this says 61% of people are against, 15% of people, only 15% of people strongly approve of the tariffs. So it's weird to be messaging on this issue unless you're only trying to campaign to one man, Donald Trump. Well, that's what we have time for today on Kentucky's Voice. I've been your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider. If you like what I had to say, one, you can follow me on social media at KY Cooperrider on Twitter. On Facebook, just search Andrew Cooperrider. You can also head over to theandrewshow.com, see all the places to listen to me. But I'm right here on 970 Sundays at 6 p.m.